To enlist or not to enlist? That is the latest heated debate here in South Korea over mandatory military service for members of K-pop sensation BTS. Now, in this segment of Viewpoint, we bring you the thoughts of foreign journalists on this matter. I have Andres Sanchez BRAUN from EFE Spain here in the studio. Andres, it's good to have you back.
Thanks for having us here, Sunny.
I also have Sebastien FALLETI from FIGARO. Sebastien, welcome back.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Right, and joining the session virtually is JOTAM CONFINO, journalist at HAA-RETZ and T-V-2 Denmark. JOTAM, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Right, Andres, let's begin with you then. Your personal thoughts, please, on the debate, ongoing debate that is, with regard to mandatory military service for BTS here in South Korea.
Well, I mean, for artists like BTS to, be forced to put their career on hold for 18 to 21 months, that's a lot of time without rehearsing, producing, composing. So, it's totally understanding their concern and the fans' concern and, South Korea's concern, given how important they are for the local economy. But on the other hand, I think there's also a legitimate concern for people that are not artists and are worried about what the broadening of these exemptions might bring, and the problem with them being deemed not important enough for their contributions to society, not important enough to be exempted from military service. I think this is probably the perfect moment for Korea maybe to open the door and debate maybe if there's a necessity, there's maybe this is the good time to privatize, to professionalize, the army, right?
Right. And Sebastien, where do you stand on this particular debate? Do you believe that members of BTS should be exempt from compulsory conscription given their role in enhancing Korea's cultural standing?
Well, of course, as a foreign national, I have absolutely no right to give any advice on this very sensitive issue. But there's no question, and if we look back we know that some other people in Korea can be exempted, like some athletes, some musical classic musicians. So there's no question that what BTS brings to South Korea is on par with some of those athletes. I mean, BTS has put Korea on the map. They won so many charts. So there's no question about that. The question is more about fairness. Of course, Korea is a country obsessed with ranking. So it's easy when you have a gold medal or when you have a clear set of rules to say, okay, if you reach the gold medal, you're going to be exempted. When it comes to artists, it's a different story. That's where there is a debate. But I think it's very important, as Andres said, it's the right time to have a debate about this, because this issue, it might sound a bit of a light issue, but it's actually touching upon very sensitive issue, because we know how South Korea society is attached to fairness. We've seen in the past few years, that sometime when someone got access to some university for a reason that seems to be unfair, it triggered massive political scandal. So this society needs fairness. We'll look at this in a very close way. So it's important that there's a discussion at the National Assembly, in society, and say that is there a reason for these people to be exempted despite their success? We shouldn't be naive about this, because the truth is also these people are making huge amount of money. And what is at stake is actually millions or billions of dollars for those young people. So it's not just an issue about artists. Behind there's some money, vested interest. So the question is also, if they're exempted, is there also a way for them to contribute to society? And if you exempt them, how do you make sure that there's no free riding in the future? So this is actually a very interesting discussion, and it's worth being on the political radar. And on the debate in this country, I think.
Right, of course. Meanwhile, JOTAM, you are Danish-Israeli by birth, and I believe your father was a veteran Israeli soldier. What are your thoughts on this ongoing dispute over military service for BTS here in South Korea?
I think I would agree with Andres that as a foreigner, I don't want to go into the debate really with my own personal opinion. In this particular case, it's the pop singers in South Korea. I would say, however, that first of all, debate is crucial in any democracy for any change. That's number one. And number two, I think each country in the world should have its own rules, because not all countries have military threats at their borders. South Korea is one of them. So obviously, you should have different rules than, let's say, Denmark, because Denmark isn't really in a state of war with anyone. Denmark is also part of NATO, which means that it will be protected by NATO if someone attacks it. And also, it doesn't have a nuclear power, a hostile nuclear power right in its backyard. So it makes complete sense that there are completely different rules for each democracy in the world. And I think that it's very healthy when South Korea, when you're debating this, that you have principles that you lay the foundation on debate upon. Is it a money question? Is it a matter of whether you contribute enough to society? What is actually the starting point for the debate? Because I heard Andres say something about, yes, they bring in a lot of money, which means that they pay a lot of taxes, and in that way they make the wheels go round in society in South Korea. That's a great point, but the starting point should really be, which principle are we even discussing the military draft laws on?
Right, valid points, of course. Andres, I believe conscription was abolished in Spain back in the year 2001. Can you tell us a bit about the background behind the decision to rid off mandatory military service in Spain after 230 years, is it?
Yes, and actually, you know, Spain and South Korea share the fact that they were, back in the day, both, you know, had military governments. And mandatory military service was something that all men had in common while they were growing up. It was even, you know, a rite of passage of sorts. But I think actually JOTAM pointed something very interesting in that sense. With the turn of the century, what had happened in Spain was, you know, the country had recovered democracy 23 years earlier. It had joined NATO. It had joined the European Union. So up until that point, those last 23 years had meant basically peace and prosperity for Spain. And we also have the fall of the Eastern Bloc. So by the year 2001, basically Spaniards saw no enemies. There was no talk like there used to be back in the day of, you know, enemies of the homeland, communists trying to invade and destroy your country. The enemy was gone. So by the year 2001, we're talking about, you know, the days of the Fukuyama's end of history. Basically, the Spanish people saw no need to keep mandatory service, and you know, eventually it was abolished, and we went for a professional army.
Right,
and that's
I see.
how it still is.
And in France, Sebastien, after almost 2 decades since phasing out conscription for men, the country's teenagers, back in the year 2019, I believe, took part in a pilot program as part of President Emmanuel Macron's pledge to reintroduce a form of civic service that would offer the young a taste of military life. What has been the response to that?
Well, absolutely. That's been one of the key promises of the then candidate Emmanuel Macron in 2017 when he first won the presidency. And it was interesting because more than 2 decades after, France went for a professional military service, professional army, sorry, and canceled the military service. That was back in '95 when, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, France felt that there was no need for military service, but we need a professional army to be able to project your troops far beyond Europe. So that was 20 years later. Macron is realizing the value also having a military service. What is this value? He says it's the need for young people, for any class, any origin, to get together at least for a short period of time to learn more about the so-called value of the French Republic. So what is at this stage, this is a program that is building up. Last year, 18,000 young French people between 15 and 17, like teenagers, spend 10 days together. But the idea is by 26, it will become a compulsory program where basically for 1 month, teenagers will have to spend 1 month together and learn. They have to wake up early in the morning, they have to salute the flag, they have to learn about French Republic values. And if they want to keep on, they could potentially do a longer period of service in NGOs or in public services. And they can also learn about defense if they want. They can work in the police, in in the military. So this is basically an attempt by the government, the realization that military service add a value in terms of a cohesive value where you can glue the society. And that's really important in the moment in France where there's increasing sense of inequality or diversity within society. There's also a lot of migrants in France, people of foreign origin, and the idea of the military service like this is to bring all these people together so they can still have something in common. So it's remains to be seen whether they can keep it as planned and make it compulsory. That's the big question for the second mandate of President Macron we just started.
Right. And JOTAM, do share with us a bit about the compulsory military service over there in Israel.
Yes, so in Israel, everyone has to go to the army at the age of 18. Men go for 32 months and women go for 24 months. And it has been like this since the establishment of the state, really. The military is the backbone of the country, and it has been like that from the beginning, from 1948, because Israel has been in a state of war with the surrounding states for decades. They eventually made peace with Egypt and with Jordan, but at the moment, they are still in a state of war with Syria. There's Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, considered a terrorist organization by most countries in Lebanon, that is a direct threat to Israel. You have Hamas and Islamic Jihad, two Palestinian, also considered terrorist organizations in Gaza that are from time to time firing rockets at Israel. And you have many other countries such as Iran, Iraq that are very hostile towards Israel. So it is the backbone here, which is why everyone has to go to the army. That being said, there's a lot of debate also about the exemptions in Israel, because there's always an exemption to a rule, of course. And in this case, it's religious Jews, Orthodox Jews. They get to basically not go to the army if they don't want to. And they are in hundreds of thousands here at this point. They weren't in the beginning of the state of Israel when it was established. But today, hundreds of thousands of Orthodox Jews get to go free from the army. And this is basically a law that was passed by the Israeli government decades ago to give some sort of freeways, some exemption to this particular segment in society. Today, it is widely discussed, and a lot of people are angry about it. Why aren't they going to the army? Why do they get to not go for 32 months into the army? So it's a huge debate, a little bit like the one you have in South Korea, only it's not pop bands, but religious people that are the ones being exempted. So a huge debate going on here in Israel.
Right. And Andres, in recent days, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has renewed interest in national defense capabilities. That being said, what are the chances of Spain perhaps reinstating a form of military service for men in the future?
Well, as of now, I think that's highly unlikely. But, you know, the Ukraine war could take any turn. We never know. But of course, that said, you know, countries like Spain or Portugal or even France, you know, we stand at the western side of Europe, and in that sense, we feel that the threat to our territorial integrity is not as compromised as other countries in the East, which actually have kept their military services. Like I can think of Greece. Ukraine actually recovered the mandatory military service after the invasion of the Donbas area in 2014. But what can actually also happen is what has happened in countries like Sweden, which actually had to restart the mandatory military service because they were actually running out of professional soldiers. The armed forces found no way to engage people into the military, and they had to reinstate the mandatory military service. Is that a problem happening now in Spain? I don't believe so. Right now, the troops are numbering around 80,000, and the government deems that is necessary as far as it goes to defending the national territory. But as you said, there's a war going out in Ukraine, and you never know what could happen in the next few years.
Right, we don't. Sebastien, let's go back to the debate on BTS then. What alternative service do you suppose could members of BTS engage in instead of the military then?
Well, I think there's also some creative way where you can find a middle ground here, because people are talking here about either exemption or going to the fully fledged military service. But if we look in the past in other countries, there's a lot of pop stars who were enrolled in the military service in other countries. Even back in the US, you had Elvis Presley, who he had to do his duty. In France also, we had some famous pop star who had to do military service. But you know what happened? It was a great PR operation for the military. You bring them on, but you give them, they don't necessarily do the hard work, but they show up to see the troops, they cheer up the people. I mean, there are also ways where you could have a band like BTS contributing without necessarily doing the service that other Koreans do. I mean, it's open. The other alternative is to do some work for the community through NGOs or through some public services. I think there's ways where you could find a compromise so they will show that they are doing something for society without necessarily putting on hold their career. So the question is also whether the society here in South Korea is ready to accept this kind of creative solution, or whether we're going to stick to one size fits for all approach where basically there's no flexibility.
Right, it's an ongoing debate, so we'll have to wait and see probably. All right, Sebastien, thank you very much for your thoughts. Andres, thank you for your thoughts and your time. And JOTAM over in Israel, thank you very much for joining us live at this hour.
My pleasure.